The future is unwritten, so what comes next is ours to write. We are the game changers, hands-on with real-world impact. We redesign the room and reimagine the concept, together, limited by nothing. Because when you write the future, there's always another page. So, what's next? Find out.
It's that thrill of a new opportunity, of shared connection, of wrapping your head around how it all works. It's closing the pitch on a game-changing idea, the late nights spent with your teammates, and how industry shapes the world with each disruption, innovation, twist and turn. When we talk about business, it's more than just outdated corporate notions. It goes beyond water cooler conversations, 9-to-5s or profit and loss. It's fighting for the social and environmental impact of commercial decisions. It's learning the right questions to ask. It's finding the glass ceiling and breaking through. When we say business, we mean new models of enriched economies at local and global scale. We mean what's next for future skills, technology and beyond. When we say business, we mean it.
The future is unwritten, so what comes next is ours to write. We are the game changers, hands-on with real-world impact. We redesign the room and reimagine the concept, together, limited by nothing. Because when you write the future, there's always another page. So, what's next? Find out at RMIT.
It's that thrill of a new opportunity, of shared connection, of wrapping your head around how it all works. It's closing the pitch on a game-changing idea, the late nights spent with your teammates, and how industry shapes the world with each disruption, innovation, twist and turn. When we talk about business, it's more than just outdated corporate notions. It goes beyond water cooler conversations, 9-to-5s or profit and loss. It's fighting for the social and environmental impact of commercial decisions. It's learning the right questions to ask. It's finding the glass ceiling and breaking through. When we say business, we mean new models of enriched economies at local and global scale. We mean what's next for future skills, technology and beyond. When we say business, we mean it.
The future is unwritten, so what comes next is ours to write. We are the game changers, hands-on with real-world impact. We redesign the room and reimagine the concept, together, limited by nothing. Because when you write the future, there's always another page. So, what's next? Find out at RMIT.
It's that thrill of a new opportunity, of shared connection, of wrapping your head around how it all works. It's closing the pitch on a game-changing idea, the late nights spent with your teammates, and how industry shapes the world with each disruption, innovation, twist and turn. When we talk about business, it's more than just outdated corporate notions. It goes beyond water cooler conversations, 9-to-5s or profit and loss. It's fighting for the social and environmental impact of commercial decisions. It's learning the right questions to ask. It's finding the glass ceiling and breaking through. When we say business, we mean new models of enriched economies at local and global scale. We mean what's next for future skills, technology and beyond. When we say business, we mean it.
Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to the first of 3 cybersecurity webinars hosted by RMIT. My name is Frank Kennedy, Associate DVC Strategy and Innovation for the College of Business and Law. I'm joining this webinar from Sydney, and I send my very best wishes to everyone who is in lockdown, and I hope you stay safe and remain positive during this difficult period for Melbourne. Technology facilitates working across several traditional lands, and RMIT University acknowledges the people of the Woiwurrung and Boonwurrung language groups of the Eastern Kulin Nation, on whose unceded lands we conduct the business of the university. RMIT University respectfully acknowledges their ancestors and elders, past and present. In this time when our Willem, our camp or meeting place, is dispersed across many separate homes, we hope that you have a strong sense of noogle, of belonging, in meeting with your colleagues, friends and family, using alternative and accessible communication methods. RMIT also acknowledges the traditional custodians and their ancestors of the lands and waters across Australia where we conduct our business. Keeping Australia cyber secure in 2021 is the theme of our Second Thought Leadership series. The aim of our Thought Leadership webinars is to inform and educate, to stay connected with all of you, and establish new partnerships and collaborations between the college and industry. This series is a great means of showcasing relevant research capabilities and expertise within the college. We are
Sorry, I couldn't quite hear you.
We are delighted to be presenting this series in collaboration with the RMIT University's Centre for Cyber Security, Research and Innovation. The Centre brings a truly multidisciplinary approach to the organisation, human and technology aspects of cyber security. Together, we are holding a total of 3 webinar sessions discussing topics around critical infrastructure, cyber security and critical technology in the Indo-Pacific, and ransomware. If you have not already done so, please make sure you use the QR code on the slide to register for the upcoming webinars. Our next webinar includes DFAT's Cyber Ambassador Tobias Feakin and RMIT's Apex Centre's Dr. Craig Emerson, discussing the importance of cooperation on cybersecurity in the Indo-Pacific. Our final webinar on ransomware features Corinne Best from the Department of Home Affairs Cyber Industry Advisory Panel, Michael Stringer from Amazon Web Services, and our very own Professor Matt Warren. This mix of industry experts should make for a very interesting discussion. Today's webinar on critical infrastructure will be moderated by my colleague, Professor Matt Warren. Matt is the Director of the Cybersecurity Research and Innovation Centre. Matt is a researcher in the areas of cybersecurity, computer ethics, and a Professor of Cybersecurity here at RMIT University. He has authored and co-authored over 300 publications and has received numerous grants and awards from national and international funding bodies. Professor Warren is a Fellow of the Australian Computer Society and gained his PhD in Information Security Risk Analysis from the University of Plymouth in the United Kingdom and has taught within Australia, Finland, Hong Kong and the United Kingdom. I'm very excited to open the floor to Professor Matt Warren. Over to you, Matt.
Thank you, Frank. It's great to be able to chair this discussion, and I have to acknowledge the hundreds of attendees that we have today, which certainly highlights the importance of critical infrastructure, and also the high representation from industry in terms of our audience, because it's such a topical area that we're now seeing impacting all aspects of industry and society. So Australia is a developed and mature society, and it means we're highly dependent on our key critical systems at both the national and state level. These systems have become more dominant in our society as the information age has developed. We can group them together and describe them as critical infrastructure. Infrastructure is so vital that if they're incapacitated or destroyed, would have an impact on our daily lives, of our industry, of our government. And this is why for this first seminar, we're talking about critical infrastructure, because it's something that impacts every Australian organisation and every government department. So the theme of the seminar series is about keeping Australia cyber secure in 2021, and certainly kicking off looking at critical infrastructure is an important aspect that then would introduce those other topics. So so in terms of today's session, we are honoured to have a number of experts from across Australia. So our panel today is Jennifer Stockwell, Sujeeva, Setunge, and Rohan Davies, and I'll be introducing them individually in a moment. So in terms of the structure of today, we'll be asking a number of questions, and then asking the panel the questions. Then what we'll do is ask the audience to post questions that they have. So in the top right hand corner, there's a little area with a question marks, where you can post your questions that you would like to ask the panel. So we encourage you to submit your questions via that Q&A chat function, and we'll be go into those questions during the course of the session. So it gives me great honour to introduce Jennifer Stockwell. Jennifer is the National Cyber Security Principal at Telstra and is our first panel member today. So Jennifer is very much involved at the forefront of cybersecurity and critical infrastructure. She is the National Cybersecurity Principal at Telstra and is involved in delivering cyber policy insights to executives, stakeholders, involved in dealing with the very complex threat landscape that we're working with, as well as working with our international partners around the world, dealing with these common issues and challenges that we faces. And also is part of Telstra. She manages the national security and critical infrastructure regulatory obligations. Before joining Telstra, Jennifer was Director of Cybercrime Intelligence in the Australian Cybersecurity Centre, and she has previously led threat intelligence and security teams in the UK and Australia. So I don't know if you want to say a quick hello, Jennifer, just to make sure.
Yeah, sorry, I just lost your audio, just the last bit of that, but thanks for the lovely introduction, Matt, and thanks for the opportunity to join the conversation today.
Wonderful, thank you. Our second panelist for today is Sujeeva Session, and she is the Associate Deputy Vice Chancellor, Research and Innovation at RMIT University in the College of Science, Engineering and Health here at RMIT University. So before joining RMIT, she was a lecturer and senior lecturer at Monash University, where she completed her PhD in structural engineering. She's been leading research on disaster resilience and optimized asset management of critical civil infrastructure over the past decade, delivering a cloud-hosted asset management software platform, which is currently commercially deployed amongst public and private infrastructure authorities. And certainly, you know, I know one of the large grants that Sujeeva is working on at the moment is in the European Union, looking at critical infrastructure at the European Union in terms of rail transportation. So Sujeeva will be able to bring us sort of insights from around the world, you know, in terms of her contribution.
Thanks very much for the kind introduction, Matt. It's great to be here. Thank you.
Thank you. And our third and final panel member is Rohan Davies. Rohan is the head of cyber risk and assurance for the Victorian Department of Premier and Cabinet Cybersecurity Office, and he's leading unit, and he's leading that unit, and that unit you know, looks at how to work collaboratively with public sector organisations throughout Victoria to improve their cyber risk management, you know, to deal with the ongoing issues and challenges, you know, that come out of cyber incidents and cyber disruptions. He also works with state, private and Commonwealth partners across a range of committees to improve cybersecurity for critical infrastructure in the community within Victoria and beyond. Previously, Rohan has held a variety of information and cybersecurity positions across state and Commonwealth agencies, including leading Victoria's cyber incidents team. So it's great to have you on board, Rohan.
Yeah, thank you so much, Matt, for the kind introduction, and it's great to join everyone here from lockdown in Victoria. And I'd just like to pass out a well done to all my other Victorians who have really taken you know, great strides over the last couple of weeks to contribute to our battle against the last COVID outbreak. So well done, everyone.
Thank you, and you know, it's wonderful to have such a great panel today of such, you know, such great caliber. So what we're going to do is go through a series of questions just to get people's views, you know, regarding the current issues and status around critical infrastructure in Australia, and then, as I said at the beginning, towards the end, we'll then throw open to the Q&A session from the audience. So in terms of the audience, you know, please think of those questions and please, you know, post them in that Q&A function area, and we'll be getting to those questions later. So my first question, and I'll start with Jennifer, is an area I know that you're sort of working very heavily around, is the Australian government strategy. And what we're seeing with the Australian government is new policies and strategies coming out redefining what critical infrastructure is and what systems of national significance are. So from your perspective, working at Telstra, this new approach that the Commonwealth's taking around critical infrastructure and these systems of national significance, what does it mean? What does it mean for industry? What does it mean, you know, for Australia?
Thanks, Matt. And as you've alluded to, this critical infrastructure uplift that is being driven through the new critical infrastructure legislative reform is a key initiative of the 2020 cybersecurity strategy. But it was always going to be there, but there's a couple of things that are driving it. I would say one of those, in terms of extending the range of critical infrastructure sectors, the threat landscape has evolved. There's really a lot of work to be done to raise the bar across sectors to bring everyone up to sort of hardening the whole Australian environment against those cyber threats and ensuring a kind of balanced coverage. I think there's a bit of a realization through COVID. It's really magnified the importance of some of the sectors that you may not traditionally have thought of as critical, but then you've realized throughout the COVID period how pivotal they are to our way of life and how much of our way of life has shifted online. So things like now food and grocery will be captured, logistics. So things that are really critical to us, you know, living, getting our home deliveries, getting everything we need to be able to continue online. So I think that's those interdependencies between sectors have really driven a lot of this. And just one more thing to add about the systems of national significance. That definition of systems of national significance is really about impact. So it's making sure that those entities that are responsible for those systems are as resilient as possible to minimise any impact to our national economy or our security or our sovereignty if there is any impact to the integrity or availability or confidentiality of those systems. So it's really focusing on building that resilience.
Thank you for that, Jennifer. And Rohan, I was going to ask for your opinion, because you're dealing it from a very sort of different perspective, is looking, I suppose, at Commonwealth legislation and seeing how it reflects and impacts the state of Victoria. So what's your view regarding that? And I suppose also the new cybersecurity strategy that's also being developed in Victoria, do they complement each other?
Yes, certainly, Matt, and Jen's done a great job of highlighting the increased threat that we're seeing in this space. And certainly from a Victorian perspective, we have a vision of a cyber safe Victoria, and that doesn't end at our network boundaries when it comes to the impact it extends to the community itself. And what we're seeing more of society online and more critical infrastructure connected to the outside world. And exactly as Jen highlighted, more interconnected consequences of disruption in these spaces. We've moved from PCs, local networks, corporate environments, and we're now moving into the cloud, digital enterprises. Society is increasingly connected and we're living our lives online. All of this has a associated potential, both opportunity, but greater risks to us as a nation. So Victoria's been working with the Department of Home Affairs and the federal government, for some time on strengthening the cybersecurity of our critical infrastructure. We do run our own initiatives as well as a state. But ultimately, this piece of work, all pieces of work, are around keeping our communities safe, our societies connected, and enjoying those benefits while reducing that risk, especially while we are continually exposed to increased cyber threats. So our national interests, our community interests are all aligned to keeping these services online, our communities safe and connected to their government and the rest of their community. So that's kind of my thoughts on that, Matt.
Thank you, Rohan. And I'll pass over to Sujeeva, and I'd be very interested to get your thoughts around the work that you're doing in the European Union around critical infrastructure, and whether from your experience there's differences in with the project and the partners that you're working in the European context compared to an Australian context.
Thanks, Matt. It's a good question. The project I'm working on looks at the cyber events on the resilience of the rail infrastructure. So my background has been in predictive modeling of infrastructure systems, mainly considering physical resilience and physical events. So this is a new experience for me because I'm using the same approach I have used in modeling the resilience of physical systems to cyber events. So the process is very similar. So we do identify the system and the interconnected parts. Considering what Jennifer and Rohan just mentioned about interconnectivity of different systems, we have been very good at modeling systems and also modeling connectivity. And this then causes vulnerabilities for our systems. So when you have an event created, a cybersecurity event impacting on the system, it impacts on all the connected systems. So modeling this is very interesting. So we are using a fragility modeling approach where we look at an event and the consequences and the flow of that, and then trying to create different scenarios and the impacted elements of the rail system so that the authorities can be prepared for these events if and when it happens. And also the system resilience can be enhanced by considering the events at the design stage so that you can eliminate or reduce the likelihood of these events. So it's an exciting project. Yeah, thank you.
Excellent. Thank you for that, Sujeeva. And it's so wonderful to see, research being undertaken at RMIT having an impact around the world, on the other side of the world in Europe. That's great to see. So the concept of critical infrastructure, it has been around since the late 1990s, early 2000s. But we're now in 2021, and why is it now that security and resilience of our critical infrastructure has become such a major issue? And I may just start with Rohan.
Yeah, thank you, Matt. It is always dangerous throwing a definition out there, but when we look at risk being our impact and likelihood, times our likelihood, we really can jump into exactly what some of these key drivers are. So we know our likelihood's increasing because we've got our increasing threat activity. We have sophisticated actors who are increasingly willing to use sophisticated cyber weapons or tools to target critical infrastructure for profit. They may be doing it for national interests. They could be doing it for a broad array of reasons, but the likelihood's increasing, and we're seeing that disruption now almost on a daily basis. Whether it's impacts to our critical food and grocery sector, we've seen recently a major foodstuffs provider being targeted, where we've seen the pipeline attacks in the US, or the targeting of our medical facilities that mums and dads and families use on a daily basis. This is really raising that the profile of cyber risk amongst the community, but also amongst our leaders around Australia. And we're seeing, the addresses, whether it be at state level parliament or national level parliament, where a conversation has really started. As we increasingly are connected, those consequences of disruption are just so much greater. So 2021 has ultimately been probably not so much the catalyst or the beginning, the genesis of this work, but ultimately it's been building over the last several years as we've started to see all that activity take place. And I think it's it's fantastic to see such proactive efforts, not just by governments but also by organisations, to really uplift their cybersecurity. And we're seeing that private investment by organisations to keep themselves, connected and delivering services to their community on a daily basis.
Thank you, Warren. Jennifer, this must be an area that you've, dealing with daily, and you must have seen so much change happening. So why is it critical infrastructure is now of such importance?
Well, thanks, Matt. And as I alluded to before, I think, COVID's really accelerated this, but we're already on this trajectory. Our connectivity really underpins our online lives and the whole of the economy. And something we really care about at Telstra is making sure that as many, nationally, as many people can be connected and living their online lives in the best way, and making sure we really got that digital inclusion happening right out into our remote and regional communities. So there's increasingly driving to drive out these new technologies like 5G, especially to try and increase that connectivity. But obviously that when you increase connectivity, from a sort of cyber perspective, people will say, well, you're increasing also the attack surface. It does mean we're kind of also increasing our visibility of the threat landscape, which is great too, but it's kind of, I think it's that sort of permeation of connectivity has made governments sit up and realise, well, this is great, but with this opportunity, we need to manage the risk more proactively and make sure that we understand it as best we can and keep up our understanding of the risk with the pace of technology.
Excellent, thank you. And Sujeeva, with your experiences and, what's your view, I suppose, even with your European Union funding, is why, the European Union is now considering, this being such a major challenge?
Yes, thanks, Matt. Now, I think we have always been looking at physical resilience of systems for the past decade or so. So some examples are initially we were looking at resilience to natural events, natural hazards. Then we were looking at events triggered by terrorist attacks, blast, and so on. So these are all physical events. However, as mentioned by the other panelists, this interconnectivity, development of digital transformation of systems has created vulnerabilities which are making us open for cyber events and cyber incidents. So the consequences of which can have vast impacts. So a natural hazard or a physical event may be restricted to a area of definition which is bounded by certain boundaries, whereas here we are leaving our systems completely open, and with the interconnectivity designed for level of service provided, we are also creating vulnerabilities. So in our space, we are looking at creating digital twins of infrastructure systems where we integrate visualization, Internet of Things, and live sensors, numerical models. And we always wonder if these are open to someone who has malicious intents, what could be happening. So we are creating vulnerabilities for us with the advancement of the technologies.
Excellent. No, and that's such a sort of a valid point. Is literally, everything is built upon something to get to this point. So I think you've given us some real good examples of how previous research or previous issues have got us to where we are today. So as we sort of mentioned at the beginning, that there's a lot of policy reform going on at the moment in Australia, and there's this concept of systems of national significance. And for the first time, universities and research entities are being proposed as being a new sector within that sort of broader definition of critical infrastructure and systems of national significance. What do you think this means for the university or research sectors? Because it's something new that they've had to deal with that they haven't had to deal with before. So I may start with Sujeeva because of your role, and I'm sure this is something that you've sort of been looking at or been involved with, from the university's perspective.
Yeah, definitely. Universities will be impacted on by multiple fronts. So first and foremost, we host a huge amount of personal data. We have, so for example, at RMIT, we have 84,000 students and all the data are hosted in our systems, and a large amount of people have access to these. So how do we ensure the integrity and the accountability of the people who access this data, protecting the data and the security of the data? So that's one aspect. On the other hand, we also engage in cutting edge research into this space. For example, we have developed an asset management platform for critical infrastructure. We host data on the bridge network of Australia in Victoria, and we do predictive modeling. And more recently, we had to answer a lot of questions from the industry partners about the security of the data, and that made us aware of the tremendous amount of trust that is placed on us and the need for securing this data and making sure we ask the right questions about the security of our systems and the hosting and the modeling and the people who are engaged in these activities. So that is the data from our industry partners and the responsibility we have for the partners. And then we also create a lot of knowledge. So this knowledge at the hand of the wrong person could lead to a lot of issues as well and vulnerabilities. So I see there are three main areas where we need to be conscious of the duty of care as an institution. And I'm really pleased to see in the new legislation, universities are identified as critical infrastructure. So I believe this will enable us to secure the required resources to ensure that our systems integrity is protected.
Excellent, thank you. Thank you for that. And Rohan, this is going to make your life, I suppose, a little bit more interesting, because all of a sudden you have all of the Victorian universities and research entities in Victoria that are now these systems of national significance. What, from the Victorian government, what impact do you think, you know, this will have, or does it already is in line with, you know, the Victorian government's current thinking?
Yeah, certainly, Matt. So under the proposed legislation being presented from Home Affairs, I believe our universities will become recognised as critical infrastructure. So not systems of national significance. That still is a series of subsystems which are in some cases yet to be defined, and I believe that further work with the education sector needs to continue before those are progressed. But that's certainly a matter that we'll work closely with with Home Affairs. When it comes to Victoria's perspective, so we've been investing in the security of the public sector for some time. So we introduced legislation some time back to introduce the Protective Data Act, or the PDP. Probably got my acronyms wrong, or my name of legislation wrong, which is a little bit embarrassing always. And sorry to our friends at OVIC if you are have dialed into this. But the Victorian government's been working with all of its critical infrastructure providers to really uplift the standards of both the data protection but also privacy for its community. And Sujeeva really hit the nail on the head when we talk about how much PPI these organisations do hold. Ultimately, I see this resulting in increased awareness and recognition through organisational leadership within those universities themselves, the sector more broadly, and that will result in ultimately opportunity for the sector. So as they harden their networks, become more secure environments, and they invest in that capability, they're going to have greater levels of confidence, not only from government to be able to handle and work on more sensitive data and projects perhaps related to national security. And then they can really capitalise that when it comes to research and opportunities for those organisations. And we have seen that those pieces of work are already underway around the country, where learning institutions are really investing in that capacity.
Thank you. And Jennifer, your view as from a critical infrastructure provider, this broadening of what critical infrastructure is, how does these new definitions, impact, your perception or your work?
Well, I think I just want to kind of go to something that that Rohan talked about there, which I really loved, in terms of that if you can drive this uplift across the industry and across particular sectors, you create that confidence. And everything we do in building in security into everything we do in the network, for example, is about having that there. So from there, you've got a sort of springboard for innovation, and you've got a confident place from which to go forward and move to the next thing and innovate. So I think that's really important to consider here. I think overall, this is just going to drive a much stronger focus on not only on cybersecurity, because the new reforms are also focused on how cybersecurity and physical and personnel and supply chain security all work in together and mesh to make sure you're in the strongest possible position against those threats. And going back to the university sector, and something that, just to pick up something Sujeeva said about kind of the threats, I think it's going to be an opportunity for each of those sectors to look strategically at what information they have that's of value, and who might be interested in that, and what those strategic threats might be, and how do we best protect it. And hopefully, and I expect you will expect to see, if you're kind of new to being critical infrastructure, because Telstra is not new to being critical infrastructure, this is kind of well practiced for us, but if you're new to that, I think you're going to see more sort of guidelines and templates and things to help you that are learnings from existing critical infrastructure best practice that will help you raise your level of security across the economy. So watch for that.
Thank you. And the other question I sort of have is around the impact of technologies like IoT, Internet of the Things, are now being used, to support a lot of critical infrastructure development of smart cities. But the problem is IoT is actually built with a lot of insecurity in it. And I suppose, how do we deal with an issue where we are using insecure technology as part of our critical infrastructure? And I may just start with Jennifer on this one, just because it's very much an industry issue at the moment.
So a couple of things on that. I mean, IoT, again, is an amazing opportunity in so many ways to increase visibility and to be able to really focus in on getting excellent results for agriculture, for education. There's all sorts of interesting use cases there. It is about how do you make sure that you've got the right visibility and that you can. There's some really interesting things, say in 5G, where you can slice up bits of the network, so you actually can control and remove and move and refocus. So actually, as long as you've got it all kind of connected well, you can again, it's about balancing that risk and the innovation. There is some also really interesting work going on in terms of IoT devices, and how do we understand what's best practice on security for those, and how do we make it really clear to the consumer what the security levels are and what their risks are that they need to manage. So there's quite a bit going on in that space. I'm sure Sujeeva's got more to say on the smart city side of things.
Excellent, and that's a good introduction to Sujeeva. If you could, if you're able to share your views around IoT and smart cities.
Thanks, Matt. I think it is an exciting area we have ventured into, and a good example is with the Smart Cities grant, we have created 3 smart precincts for 3 local councils, and where we were trying to integrate optimized management of infrastructure with the level of service provided to the community. One issue that we came across is one council did not want us to link to their network, and we were creating a LoRaWAN network in one facility and using the in-house Wi-Fi in another facility. So out of the 3 councils, 1 council still did not let us connect the whole system to their main system because they were concerned about the security issues. So because it is in the research stage and we were using the system with very limited capability, and we actually created a situation that we have enough boundaries there and managed to get it through. But we can definitely see in moving forward in creating a smart cities type scenarios, you need to address the security concerns very well. Otherwise, stakeholders will not come on board, and the IoT devices and the 5Gs we are generating will require a lot of advocacy to move the technology forward. So, but it is an exciting space to see the 2 elements moving forward in parallel, security with the capability, technological capability moving in parallel to deliver the service with security. So that is a challenge I think the researchers will have to rise to, and it is an exciting research space. And at RMIT, this has been progressed in number of fronts between our artificial intelligence research group and cybersecurity center, which Matt is leading, and also the physical security, which we are dealing with critical infrastructure, physical assets. So it's an exciting space. I'm really looking forward to progress in this space.
Thank you. And Rohan, this must be also a challenge for you because there's so many local governments that are wanting to set, their cities up as smart cities, and you've got the challenge of, of those sorts of issues. So from a Victorian's perspective, Victorian government perspective, how do you deal with the issue around things like IoT security or some technologies that may not be as secure as people wish for?
Yeah, fantastic question, Matt. And I talked about before about how we moved from PCs to corporate environments, and then we moved into the cloud, and really we're moving into digital cities and digital communities where everything's interconnected. Ultimately, in this space, whether it's IoT or industrial IoT and other forms of technologies, there's great opportunity for whether it's organisations or communities to embrace the benefits of those technology platforms. They really empower us to make more informed decisions as organisations from the data that they collect. And unfortunately, the associated impact of that is that increased attack surfaces, sometimes significant exposure to threats emerge if we haven't gone through and done the appropriate levels of vetting and screening, not just of our IoT devices, but also of our supply chains that sit around those. And those are obviously massive areas of industry, not just within government, but also across private organisation as well. And Jennifer kind of referred before to both the national and international effort where we're seeing researchers and government come together to talk about how do we make these devices more secure. How's the Victorian government working on those initiatives? We're really making sure that we go through a very considered, well-structured and strategic way to implementing those technologies, but also seizing on some of the opportunities that we get today to make sure that we're really learning as we go. And that's going to be a fundamental way that we really underpin our forward-moving strategies to make sure that we do keep Victoria as a cyber-safe place to work, live and learn.
Excellent. So no, thank you for that. So really, in terms of the questions that we've sort of touched upon, we've discussed about Australia's approach from a policy government perspective around cybersecurity. We've been talking about, security and resilience of critical infrastructure and how that's, become more important over time, as Jennifer said. Really, within this sort of COVID situation, it's really sort of highlighted some new challenges that governments and society weren't aware of. We also talked about new sectors like universities being deemed part of critical infrastructure and what that means. And then we sort of finished by talking about IoT and Industry 4 and smart cities and some of the challenges that brings. So we're now moving over to the Q&A session. So again, please feel free to post your questions that you have for the panel, and certainly I've looked at the questions, and there's many interesting questions there, so my apologies if we're not able to answer all of the questions in the time that we have available. So the first question is actually just talking about this year, building upon what Jennifer was saying about, the COVID era has really, challenged the way we're dealing with this. So the question is, there's been multiple attacks that we've seen just this year. What lessons can be applied from these attacks, in terms of the operators of critical infrastructures, in terms of how we deal with these sorts of attacks in the future? And I may start with Jennifer, just because that this is a matter that you're dealing with on a daily basis.
Yeah, thanks, Matt. And I'm not sure exactly, there have been several attacks. It's been a very kind of lively year for cyber attacks. I'm not sure exactly which ones are being referred to, but a bit of a kind of trend, for example, with the recent Colonial Pipeline ransomware attack, some recent reporting has indicated that access was gained there through an old account and possibly some password reuse or password sharing and a lack of multi-factor authentication. Now, a lot of these are kind of basic measures and part of sort of some basic security controls that, if applied across the economy, again, like I've said, we could harden our environments to things like that. So being aware of active vulnerabilities, making sure that you've got all your updates and patching up to date, making sure you've got strong authentication, all of those things are the sorts of the trends and the things that we already have it in our toolkits to do something about that. So it's about driving that increased focus and looking at the basics first.
Thank you. And Rohan, from a state government perspective, what can we learn from these recent incidences?
Certainly, I think there's a couple of key lessons, and Jennifer's really nailed the first one: do the basics and do them well. We consistently see significant breaches happening globally, and we're talking about really big companies that, and government's not immune, that have failed to do some of the basics which our attackers have exploited, and really use some simple tools to really dig into networks and do some significant harm. So what are kind of some of the other, what are some of the takeaways we've seen in other aspects of this? We've also seen the other end of this scale, where we've seen supply chain attacks that have been unbelievably sophisticated, been drawn out over a significant amount of time by attackers that are highly advanced and very dedicated to exactly what they were doing. So what's probably one of the key takeaways there, which has to be for cyber incidents: have a plan, know your plan, practice your plan, and then implement your plan when things go wrong. We all have to be prepared for cyber incidents, and even in like it comes down to households these days need to know or need to have some form of understanding about how they can respond to something going wrong. Like, who do you talk to, who do you reach out to for help in those situations when things are a little bit uncertain? So from a fundamentals perspective, I think that there's some really basic things we can do as organisations.
Thank you. And Sujeeva, I suppose this is a very interesting question from a research perspective, is what can we learn, I suppose, from the past to help us prepare for the future?
I think in addition to what was said previously, the human interface is the weakest element. And I'm sure, Matt, you will be the first person to agree with me. So when we set up the Cybersecurity Centre at RMIT, our focus has been bridging the gap between technological advances and the human interface, because that is where we often see the vulnerabilities are in terms of system compromises. So, so that's what I would like to add, Matt.
Thank you, Sujeeva. We've got another question. It actually not about critical infrastructure directly. It's actually about the other parts of industry, particularly small businesses, SMEs, that contribute to critical infrastructure, whether it's helping a critical infrastructure provider or being part of a supply chain. And it's often said that SMEs are the weakest link when it comes to cybersecurity. And, you know, in terms of critical infrastructure, you know, there's sort of challenges there. So, Rohan, from a Victorian government perspective, what's, you know, your view regarding small business SMEs around cybersecurity and their relationships with critical infrastructure?
Fantastic, Matt. I mean, what we know from industry research and from the real world impacts of cybersecurity incidents is they can be decimating to a small to medium-sized enterprises. You know, most won't recover from the significant loss events that can happen, and that can destroy someone's, you know, lifetime work setting up a small business, whether it's, you know, run by a family or, you know, it's growing and it's moving into something that's really supporting a local community. What we do know is that organisations really need to start now and get on the journey to become more cyber secure. And the critical infrastructure organisations really need to give those small to medium-sized enterprises a bit of time and guidance around what their expectations are for those smaller organisations to still be able to contribute to them. Ultimately, the critical infrastructure legislation that has been proposed from Home Affairs allows for that process, for we will have rules come out per sector, and there will be an implementation period where organisations can go through and start to introduce the measures that they appropriately need to. But what's critical for those small to medium-sized enterprises is ensuring that they're what they do put in place is commensurate with their level of risk, but also their level of assets, because a small to medium-sized enterprise can't be expected to run the same security as you know, an organisation like Telstra. But what they do have to do is, you know, they do have to certainly do well enough to be in a position where they then can support a piece of critical infrastructure. So it also does come back to that critical infrastructure provider as well. So just make sure that they have enough, whether it's monitoring capability as an organisation, or they have enough oversight of their own networks to understand if a disruption does occur, what they can do as an organisation to respond to that.
Thank you. And Sujeeva, with your experience with your project, is this something you're looking at with your European Union project in terms of, you know, supply chains, or how SMEs, you know, can have an impact on the system?
Yes, definitely. They could be the weak link if you don't look after them. So capacity building is a key in that space. So often small providers are tempted to use in-house systems. So in these type of scenarios, you can persuade the SMEs to use reputed infrastructure provided by large providers who offer security they personally may not be able to offer. So I see that has been something we have been persuading for the SMEs who work with us in our projects to use, because in that way you can actually have the security infrastructure provided by a reputed provider with at a reasonable cost, compared to an in-house developed system which may not be up to the required protection. So I think that's the way. So capacity building and making sure that the data storage, data handling, and data infrastructure is used from a reputed provider.
Excellent, thank you. And Jennifer, just to sort of round off the conversation, is this an area that you're focused on, or Telstra is?
Yes, certainly. I mean, Rohan mentioned about knowing your plan. You also need to know your supply chain and understand your supply chain. I think the new reforms bring a bit more focus on that and flowing on the obligations. So some obligations will flow onto the critical infrastructure supply chain. We want to make sure that the guidance and advice to small businesses is tailored to them, so it's not overwhelming, but they can still get the basics right. The one other thing I just wanted to highlight is that other than those small businesses in the supply chain of critical infrastructure, there is there's another initiative in the strategy called the Best Practice Regulation Task Force that looks at whole of economy. So there will be some more work coming focused on small businesses across the whole of the economy. So I encourage you to watch out for that.
Thank you. And I'd like to thank you for everyone who's posted your questions. Unfortunately, because of time constraints, we weren't able to answer all of the questions, but I did see there were so many great questions there. So it's wonderful to have, such an engaged audience today, posting such interesting questions. So I'd like to thank the panel, Rohan, Jennifer, and Sujeeva for taking part in our first of our seminar series, really, talking about the importance of critical infrastructure and really sort of, putting into context, the other seminars that we have as part of this series. I'd like to thank the audience for coming today, also for posting such interesting questions, and as I said, I'm sorry that we weren't able to get to all of them. Just a reminder that there's going to be a public recording available, and this will be sent out shortly, so you'll be receiving information. We have our next seminar coming up in a few weeks around the cyber and critical technology in Indo-Pacific, and then the final one of the series is ransomware, and you can see a QR code on the screen now, so you can find more information by scanning that code. So yes, I'd like to thank everyone for today. Thank you, our panel, and thank you, our audience.